Hello, hello! Welcome to codeLive. I'm very happy to be with you today, and thank you for joining me on this journey learning Apex. As you might know, I am a Node.js developer, and I've been doing Node for a while. I think I started doing Node.js back in 2011 and also being contributor to the open source project and been evangelizing about Node.js since version 0.6. And today, the version of Node.js is 18. So I've been in the Node ecosystem for a while and even consulted professionally doing Node. But since I joined Salesforce 3 years ago, I joined mostly to continue doing JavaScript and Node.js on the Heroku platform. And lately, you have seen me doing a lot of functions content, especially with Node. But there is a skill I am lacking and I don't have, which is Apex. I can do basic Apex operations, but I am not well versed with Apex, if you know what I mean. So I was thinking, okay, if there is more people like me out there that wants to learn about Salesforce and they have experience about a specific programming language or platform like Node.js, or let's say Java, Python, or whatever, how can they learn Apex? And that's the question I had, and I was thinking, okay, what I will be doing is having certain applications built in Node.js, and how can I solve the same problems using Apex and the Salesforce platform? And I decided to do this as a single session. So let's say, okay, let's do an Apex for Node.js developers. It will be just a single session. Then I started to take notes about all the different topics I will be able to cover. And it is too much to cover in an hour. So why not making it a series? Why not making this an opportunity to learn Apex from the perspective of somebody that knows a different programming language? So this is going to be very useful for people that is just starting with Apex and with the Salesforce platform, and for experienced developers that have experience in other platforms that they need to start creating and building applications in the Salesforce platform. So this is pretty much what we are going to be doing on this series. For the people that don't know me, my name is Julián Duque. I'm a principal developer advocate here at Salesforce. You can follow me on Twitter. This is my Twitter handle. My DMs are open, as you can see on the YouTube chat. You can send me any message, any questions if you have after the stream. I'm pretty responsive there. And let's start with the content that we have for today. Please let me know if we experience any network connection. I've been having some internet issues lately that I'm trying to solve. Not sure why, but let's start with what we are going to do today. So, moving to a different view, let me see who we have in the chat. We have Pavan, thank you very much for joining. We have Merrick, Afros, Prince Patrick, Gerson. We have Omar. We have a lot of people that have joined. Thank you very much for being with me this time. One question from Ragul. Can we receive Kafka events in a Salesforce function? On my previous codeLive, I talk about Kafka functions. Pretty much you can publish and produce messages from a function, but you cannot receive yet. Forward-looking statement, of course, this is specifically in regards to functions. The team is working on a way so a function will be able to trigger events or to respond from events pretty much. And those events could be from Kafka as well, but those are not yet implemented. So as of today, a function can produce messages, but no receive messages because the function is not constantly running. But I don't want to sidetrack this topic. Pretty much let me tell you what the plan is. As I say, I'm a Node.js developer that is learning Apex. So I decided, okay, why we don't start learning Apex by doing or by building something? Usually that's my approach when learning a new language or a new platform. I don't like to go and read documentation and start from scratch, or reading a book from the first page to the last page. That's an approach I don't like. I don't feel it's very good for me. Maybe for other people that's a very good approach, but for me, I prefer to learn by doing. I need to have a specific goal, a small application, a small problem that I can solve with that specific language, and that I can see the result. And that way, I have like instant validation that the problem I'm trying to solve, it's being solved. I'm getting result, and psychologically, I'm getting that satisfaction. So this is what we are trying to do on this stream. I'm going to try to solve a problem from scratch using Apex. I have basic knowledge. Disclaimer, I already solved it because I needed to prepare for this specific stream. But we are going to be following the same thought process that I follow while doing it, preparing for this stream. And what is this problem we are trying to solve? So we are going to get a Node.js basic application, a very basic Node.js web server, and we are going to try to migrate or refactor that web server into the Salesforce platform. I already have the Node.js application built. We will explore it. I will go through the source code. So for the people that is interested in learning Node.js, this is going to be very interesting, of course, because you are going to see also how I solve that problem using Node. But let's try to do the same thing in Apex and in the Salesforce platform from scratch. I might fail, I might encounter a lot of errors, and I know here in the chat there are a lot of experts that have way more experience than me in the Salesforce platform, so I am begging you to help me, to provide feedback, to tell me there are better ways to solve that issue that you are trying to solve, Julián. Share that information with me because this is also a learning process for the both of us. And this is why codeLive exists. So for me, the best way to start learning Apex was the developer portal that we have at Salesforce. And this is the first place you are going to visit when you want to learn anything developer related about Salesforce. Here, you can encounter what we call the developer centers. In the developer centers, we have like different tiles depending on the products that Salesforce has with a lot of resources. So you're going to go to platform where Apex lives. And here you are going to find different resources for all the other subproducts and technologies that are on their platform. One of those is Apex. And here you're going to find all of the different resources for learning Apex. Both documentation, the tools that you need to build Apex applications, Trailhead modules that are going to be super useful for you to do basic projects and basic modules learning Apex, and a lot of videos, blog posts, etc. So this is going to be your first source of truth for learning a new topic in Salesforce. But let's take a look at the thing I want to refactor, I want to build. So let's take a look at some code. Opening Visual Studio Code. So we can take a look at the Node.js code that I have prepared. Okay. So what we have here is a Node.js server. And let me know, please, in the chat if the Zoom is good, because I'm trying out a new setup, so I want to make sure that you can read. If not, you don't need to see my face. We can go full screen here. Awesome, that's better. So we are building a web server and REST API server, pretty much, that it's giving me weather information based on latitude and longitude. If you have been following my streams, you might remember that I already implemented a Salesforce functions that does this. So I'm just reusing that logic to implement this specific Node.js application. I created this Node.js application from scratch. I am not using any generator, so you are going to find like pretty much basic files. We have the server.js file that let me create the web server, and we have a library here, which is the weather.js, and this is a class called weather client that performs the HTTP request to external service. So we need to call external service that it's connected to the weather stations and have that weather data to return that information back on the server. So pretty much we are doing some sort of API wrapper here. The service we are using is the Open Weather API. So the Open Weather API is a service that you can register for free. We are using the Open Weather API. Pretty much this works by performing an HTTP request to an URL, providing the latitude and longitude of the place you wanna get the weather information, and you need to provide an API key. That API key, you are going to get it after you register your account on Open Weather. This is free. It will give you a 32 characters string that you can use as the API key. And once you perform an HTTP request, you are getting weather information. And the weather information is coming as a JSON with a lot of data. We just need two variables here, or two pieces of information. We need the name of the city, and we need the temperature. That's it. That's the only thing we are going to extract from this API, and we will expose this information on our web server. Thank you very much for letting me know that the Zoom is good. So in JavaScript or in Node.js, this is one of the things we need to take into account to start like making the differences between Node.js, JavaScript, and Apex, is that JavaScript is a dynamic language. That means that it is not typed or strongly typed. It is dynamic. We don't need to specify types. And it is very loosely object-oriented. So you can use an approach of object-oriented language in JavaScript, but it is not necessarily object-oriented. What I mean by that, you can define a class and create an instance of a class in JavaScript, but technically it's not necessarily a class. It is just a specific type of function that uses something called the prototype to store the methods and properties. So I don't want to get into the details of JavaScript right now. So it is dynamic and loosely object-oriented. Apex, on the other side, it is typed. It is strongly typed, so you will need to have types in Apex in order to work, and Apex is object-oriented. Apex is more similar to Java in that matter. Even though both languages are going to have like some similarities because they inherit the syntax structure from C and C++, obviously we are going to see a lot of main difference later. So what we are doing here, We are creating a class called weather client. This class has a constructor that receives an API key, of course. This API key, it's a private property. This is new JavaScript, so you can have private properties by appending this pound character. We are setting this API key as available on my whole instance. And then we are implemented an asynchronous method called getWeather. GetWeather receives the latitude and longitude, and then we are going to perform an HTTP request to that API. We are setting the latitude and the longitude that we get from the method signature and the app ID or the API key from the class instance. Then we are getting the body, pretty much the response from that HTTP request as JSON. And then we are returning a JSON object or a JavaScript object with the city. It is the name property, and the temperature, it is the temp property that lives under the main property in the JSON. If we go here on the JSON, we have that temp lives under main, and name it's on the root of the response. So we are just building the response that we want. Here we are importing a package from the NPM or the Node ecosystem. And here is where we have another main difference with Apex. Apex usually doesn't have a package ecosystem. Yes, there is App Exchange, and you will be able to create packages and expose classes and use those classes through a namespace in Apex, but you don't have a specific package manager as the one I use here. For example, I'm using a library called Undici. Undici is for performing HTTP requests, and what I did was running npm install Undici, and that fetch the Undici package from internet and add it into my project. And you can add more libraries into your JavaScript project using npm install. Okay, the server, here to create the HTTP server, we are using the Node.js core package HTTP. We are importing the create server class. So this is another difference that we have between Apex and JavaScript. In JavaScript, we need to specify the methods, the classes, and the functions that we are importing and exporting. In Apex, we are using pretty much class visibility, and all of those classes are going to be visible depending of the accessor attributor that I'm giving to that specific class. And we are going to see that later. So here I am importing the weather client class, and I am importing the create server method. So first I need to create an instance of the weather client by doing a new weather client. So pretty much I am creating an instance of that class. If you are an object-oriented programmer, this is going to be very similar. For any other language that performs the same, like Java or Apex, we are going to see the same approach in Apex. And we are passing the API key from the environment. What is the environment? I am running this specific Node.js application on an environment, on a shell, or on a server, and I can store variables on that specific environment. So Node.js is giving me this process.env property so I can get those variables from the environment. API key is the one that I'm going to be using to store that secret or that credential. This might be familiar for you in Apex if you use, let's say, name credentials, custom settings. We are going to need to use a different approach to store this information because we don't want secrets, credentials, or sensitive information like an API key on our source code. Then we create the server and we pass a function. This is what we call a callback function. Another main difference between Java script and Apex is that in Apex, you cannot pass functions as arguments of another functions. This is why JavaScript, it is a functional, I would say loosely functional language, because you can pass functions as arguments for another function. And that's a big difference. So here I am passing what it is called a callback function to the create server method. So pretty much every time a new request, a new HTTP request is coming to my server, I'm executing this logic. And what is this logic? I have two objects here, the request and the response. The request contains the information that it's coming from the HTTP client, and the response is the object that I'm going to be using to pretty much return the information back to you. And I just noticed that I'm doing a lot of hand movements to show you things, but I am not showing my camera. That's nice. So the request and the response are those two objects that's giving you the input and the output information for that specific HTTP client. We are going to get the latitude and longitude from the URL as parameters. The same way, for example, we pass these parameters, latitude and longitude, to the API. We are going to get those parameters on our server using this URL class. We are converting or parsing that URL so we can get those parameters. And then we execute the getWeather method from the weather client. We get the object and we return the object as a JSON. That's what we are doing. Last but not least, where does my API lives? I'm using .env files. So I'm using this .env file to store the secret. And in order to load this .env file, I'm using another module called .env. This is not part of core Node.js. This is part of the NPM ecosystem. You can open the package.json file to take into account or to take a look at the dependencies or the different packages that you are fetching from the ecosystem. Let's run the server. Let's perform an HTTP request and see how can we turn this into an Apex project. So here I am running an HTTP server. Then I am performing a HTTP request to the port 3000. I am not getting any information. Perfect. I need to pass the latitude and longitude. So let's say the latitude is going to be 30 and the longitude is going to be 29. And now I am getting the weather from the city El Alamein. Maybe this is Middle East. And the temperature now it's 29.7 Celsius. Oh, it's kind of hot in El Alamein. So this is how we are working right now. We can change this to a different location. 75, there is no city in there. Maybe 10, different place in the globe. Gadames, 41. Wow, it's really, really hot in there. Okay, perfect. So this is Node.js. So we are going to convert this code into Apex. How can we do this from scratch? I am starting from scratch. How can we start from scratch? By creating a Salesforce project. How can you create a Salesforce project? By using the Salesforce CLI. So I'm going to be using the new Salesforce CLI to create the Salesforce project, or you can use Visual Studio Code by create a project. So this is the SFDX create project by using the Salesforce extensions for Visual Studio Code, or you can use in the Salesforce CLI. You can use both SFDX or SF. I like to use SF for certain things. It's the new CLI tool that we are going to be promoting and adding more commands. But SFDX is still valid, so we are going to be using both here. So how can create a new project? By running SF generate project, and let's give it a name, Apex Sandbox. Sandbox, it's because it is not a Salesforce Sandbox. It is just a way where, let's call it Playground. It's going to be better if I call it Playground. It is not going to be that confusing. Apex Playground. It's where I'm going to be playing with Apex. Okay? So now that I created the Apex Playground project, as you can see, I have my Force app folder, my SFDX project folder. I will be able to open this with Visual Studio Code and start working from here. So what we need in order to work with Apex. So Node.js, usually it's being executed in your computer. It is a server-side language, so you can run it in your computer the same way I did it using Node, or you can run it on the cloud on a server, for example, Heroku. You can deploy a Node.js app to Heroku, or you can deploy it to AWS or to any other cloud provider. But Apex can only be executed in the Salesforce platform. So if you want to run Apex, you need to have an org, or in this case, a Scratch org. So I have a developer edition org that I would be using to deploy this Apex and run this Apex in there. So let me take a look at the chat to see if there is any questions so far. No questions. Okay. Balakrishna, how to connect and pass data from Salesforce to Node.js, Node.js to Salesforce. Can you show that, please? Very good question, and I can solve it along the way. Pretty much, how can you pass data by using REST API callouts or HTTP callouts? That's one way. The other way is by having the data synchronized between those two applications. For example, using products or services like Heroku Connect, where you can have a PostgreSQL database synchronizing data from Salesforce to a PostgreSQL database in Heroku. You can use AWS events using the event bus to synchronize and communicate data. There might be like a multiple ways depending on your use case, but it's totally possible to do it. Okay, coming back to this, let's create a Scratch org. So I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code to create a Scratch org. Let me create this Scratch org. Oh no, I need to connect to an org. Why this is not loading? Supposedly I will be able to load my org. Let me open again. It seems my extensions are disabled. Let me go. Okay. SFDX is only create a project. Okay, so for some reason it is not working with this version. Let me see. I will try to solve my issue. I will delete this project and let me create it with Visual Studio Code so I can have all the goodness from there. So create a project. Now it's activating the extensions. Let me create a project. Ha! The extensions just fail. This is amazing. So SFDX is working. Yes, SFDX is working. So let me do everything from SFDX force org list. Let me confirm that I am connected. Yes, I am connected to the orgs. So for some reason, my Visual Studio decided to stop working before the stream. Awesome. Let me see if the project that I have here still works. If it works, nope. My extension stopped working. That's amazing. Don't worry. Let's work with the CLI. Somehow my Visual Studio decided to stop working, and I will need to spend some time after this to fix it. Okay, so let's generate the project. Generate project again. It's called Apex Playground. This is the Apex Playground. Awesome. I have the Apex Playground. Now I need to do the web authorization. So I'm authorized to the Dev Hub. I think I am already authorized to the Dev Hub, so I don't need to do that. Yes, so my org is authorized. And then I will need to create the Scratch org. So force org create. This is going to be a Scratch org. Okay. And the file definition is going to be the project is Scratch. This is going to be for 30 days. And my Dev Hub is FX trial. Let me see if the Scratch org gets created. Yeah, for some reason, my Visual Studio, the Studio Code, is having issues. It is not detecting the Visual Studio Code extensions. So I was able to create a Scratch org. So sfdx fork org list. I have my Scratch org, so sure I will be able to deploy code in there, but my VS Code, it is not opening or activating the extension. And it is not even giving me any issue, right? So who knows what I did? But that's okay. It's just giving me, okay, create the project. I have classes here, and it is not giving me a way to create the class using the extension. So this is not very good. I will need to start copying and pasting files. That's not a very good experience. Let me see if I can fix the extensions. PMD, everything is installed. Yeah, sometimes takes a couple of minutes, but it should have been working right now. So extension settings. Yeah, take a look at the Salesforce extension pack. Let me reinstall. Maybe if I disable or enable again, I can get something. Okay, no. It's not loading, surprisingly. But we are not going to let this stop us. So we can create the files manually. I was trying to avoid that because, of course, the extensions give you like an easier way to create the files. Activating the extensions. Oh, yes, it works by disabling and enabling. Thank you very much for your patience. Something wonky happened here. So now the Salesforce extensions are working. How I know? I have the org information here. I am connected to my Scratch org. That's my default org. Awesome. Thank you very much, chat, for being patient and bear with me because, of course, technology. Now we can start. So what were we doing? Sure, we need to create this Apex code to fetch the weather data from the Open Weather API. And we need to expose it as a web service somehow. Sure. So I learned by going to the documentation here on the Apex reference that you can perform HTTP callouts from Apex. So there is an HTTP class, and with the HTTP class, pretty much you can perform HTTP callouts. And this is what we are going to be using for calling that specific third-party API. So let's create a new Apex class. We are going to call this class weather client, similar to Node.js. Store this class in my classes folder. This is creating me the metadata as well. And let's implement the getWeather method. So I'm not going to be using a constructor here. I'm going to be making it easier by doing a static method. So remember that this is more similar to Java. So I can have like static methods as well. Wow. Be careful. Don't solve the problem for me, Copilot. I will do it by my own. So let's do it by hand by implemented a static return a string. It's called getWeather, and I'm going to receive a latitude and a longitude. So I'm using GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot is trying to solve the problem from me, but I don't want that. So don't try to guess. I will do it on my own. Sure, let's disable Copilot because this is going to be a little bit annoying here. Awesome. So cool. We have the getWeather method. We are going to be calling this getWeather method from outside. Then we need to implement the HTTP request. So let's create an HTTP client by calling that HTTP class. We have the instance. Then we need to perform the request, right? We create a new HTTP request. And then we need to execute pretty much the request. We need to specify the endpoint. We need to specify the method. And this time, the method is going to be a get method because we are getting the information. And we need to respond, pretty much. We need to get the response from this URL. So let's have an instance of HTTP response. And then we send that request. So what we are missing here is the URL. Let's specify an URL here as a string. So remember that Apex is typed. So we need to specify the type of our variables. And now we get pretty much our URL. So I'm copying and pasting this URL to make it easier. So the URL is the Open Weather API. We are passing the latitude and longitude, and then we need the API ID. And the API ID or the API key is, how I write this, okay. We can copy and paste it from the Node.js code. Let me go to the Node.js code, Apex No, sorry. It is called Node Sandbox. Okay. Get the API key and put it here. So first red flag is that we have the API key in our code and we don't want that. But the rest looks good. What else do we need? Okay, we need to return the body of the response. And the body is going to be that JSON string, the response of this specific HTTP callout. So I have half of my problem solved. How can we test it? In order to test it, we need to deploy it to the Scratch org and we need to execute this Apex class. How can we do this? So since we are working with a Scratch org, I will be able to push my source code to the Scratch org by using sfdx. This will validate and compile the Apex class. If it is good, nothing is going to happen and it will deploy. If we have some syntax issues, it will let us know that it failed. So now the Apex class is on the Salesforce platform. We can execute this using the developer tools, or we can execute this by using the CLI. So let's use the CLI, force Apex execute, and let's get the weather information by calling the weather client, get weather, and passing the strings, right? So here, as you can see, I am not exporting the weather client. I am just setting that the weather client is public, so I have access, like my application context have access to this class, and the getWeather method is static. So I don't need an instance of weather client. I can clap getWeather immediately by referencing this class, pass the parameters, and I'm getting a string. After getting the string, I can do a system debug to output that information on the pretty much the debug console. This is the debug console right now. This is telling me that to execute, you can do Control D. Let's do Control D. And this should have executed my Apex. Let's take a look. Okay. I have a callout exception here. Unauthorized endpoint. Please check setup security remote site settings. And this endpoint pretty much is not valid. And we have all the debugging information about this HTTP request. What happened here is that I am trying to access a third-party URL, but Salesforce, as it is a secure platform, it is not letting me to do it because this is not an approved remote setting. This is not an approved URL to perform an HTTP request. So at the beginning for me was like, oh my God, this is great because we are thinking about security and I need to have an allow list of third-party sites that I can go and do HTTP requests. There is nothing like that in the Node.js ecosystem. Other JavaScript ecosystems, for example, Dino, they have implemented policies so you can have this level of security, but Node.js doesn't have that. So if for some reason you install a package that it's performing like a malicious HTTP requests to steal your credentials or to send telemetry information to a malicious third-party service, there is no way to doing it properly. And I think this is a great security feature that the platform is giving me. So let's enable that. Let's open the org by running force org open, and let's go to security remote settings, and we can give access to that specific endpoint. So I'm opening the Scratch org. I'm going to remote settings. And here, let me zoom this a little bit so you can all see. I'm creating a new remote site. This is the Open Weather API. I'm giving the URL. I want to validate the protocol. I say that it is active. I'm giving permission. Oh, this needs to contain underscores. Okay, that's good. Thank you. I'm giving permissions. My Open Weather API is enabled. And let's use the developer console, which is another feature that you can use to run that Apex. So let me debug, execute an anonymous window, a string, give me the weather information, weather client, get weather, passing the variables, and system debug, passing the information here, executing and giving me log information. So now I have the log information, and from here I can see that we should have a response. So of course there is a status code 200. So the HTTP request was successful. And there you go. We have the JSON. We have the JSON that we needed. Another difference between Apex and Node.js is that the limits that Node.js is going to impose you depends on your computer, where you are running Node.js. If it is your computer, if it is the server, you have some memory, CPU. There are like some limits that are imposed by the compute resources. Apex or Salesforce have the governor limits. So there are like a certain specific set of limits where you are running this code. And here what we have is pretty much that we can perform per Apex operation a number of 100 callouts. And I used one of those 100 callouts. So these limits for this developer edition or this license that I have, it's maybe small for certain specific use cases. This is why I keep telling you that Salesforce functions might be a very good use case when you want to go beyond limits, because now you are pretty much running compute operations on the limits that the compute environment is imposing you, or the limits that, for example, Node.js is imposing you. But in this case, we were able to execute and get the data. So now I want to perform a second thing, which is storing that API key on a secure way. So normally the best way that I learned that you can do that is by using named credentials. But named credentials are a way so you can store an URL pretty much to perform HTTP callouts and its authentication. But normally this authentication, it's either username or password, JSON Web Token authentication, or an OAuth 2.0 authentication flow. But for this specific purpose, I am using an API key. And maybe I want to use a different system to store an API key. And named credentials are not the best mechanism to do it. So what we are going to use here is custom settings. With custom settings, you will be able to have a specific custom object in Salesforce to store settings information. And I want to use that as a secrets vault to store this API key. So let's go to custom setting. Custom settings. Now, awesome. I'm going to be creating a new custom setting, so an umbrella of custom settings for the Open Weather API. So this is going to be called Open Weather. Let's call it Open Weather. It's going to be public, so any app inside Salesforce can access this information. This is for my app. And now, after I have this Open Weather, I will create a new field. And this new field is going to be the API key. An API key is going to be a text. I'm creating a text. It's called API key, 32 characters, and that's it. I'm creating my API key. How can I store the API key here? I created the API key container, but I cannot store it. So the only way you can store it is or either by creating a script, usually on a project, when you have an Apex project, here on the scripts, you can have Apex scripts that allow you to set up pretty much a project or run Apex operations. Or you can also use the developer console as well. So let's use this pretty much a Apex script to set up that API key. You are going to do this as any other Apex operation. So I learned that a custom setting is just a custom object. So it is called OpenWeather. Nice. I'm going to create a new instance of OpenWeather. For that OpenWeather, I have API key, and I'm going to be specifying that API key that I have in the code. So let's cut that API key from the code, set it here. And how can I save this? By using DML. So I am using Apex to store this information. Then this is telling me, okay, execute anonymous Apex with the currently selected text. So select the text, execute anonymous Apex with currently selected text. Amazing. This executed, no errors. Awesome. So I stored my API key. Now, how can I get the API key? In order to get the API key, I'm going to be using the same OpenWeather API. So OpenWeather API, no, OpenWeather, it's called like this. But the method that I will need to get the instance, it's the singleton get instance, if I'm not wrong. Yes, get instance. There are like a lot of other rules while using custom settings, depending if your organization is under a hierarchy or if the security permissions are under a hierarchy or if the custom settings are by user, you can pass like certain specific parameters. I'm just using the basic instance here to get the property. And now that I have the instance, I can get the API key from the property. So now this is similar to storing the variable on the environment. I have pretty much the API key stored in platform, and I'm getting that API key from platform. And if it changes, I just update that property. So I don't need to have that in my code. Obviously, we will need to update this code by redeploying. Let's redeploy. I'm redeploying my changes. Everything works. And let's execute that again on the developer console. I think on the developer console, I still have my code. No, we can do the weather client, get weather. Let's pass 2019. It's a different location. Print out the JSON, open the log. And do we have information? Yes, we have information. We have the temperature, and we should have the name of the place. But we are not doing any JSON parsing. We are just getting a string. So what I will be doing last is JSON parsing, and we don't have time to create the REST service, but on my next codeLive session, that will be next week, I will be doing REST service, and why not? Let's do what people has been asking, like connecting from a Node.js application to Salesforce by using like REST service, or by doing data access, data synchronization. We can perform that experiment as well. But I wanted to continue exploring the Salesforce platform and the capabilities of Apex. So you remember from the Node.js code, and let me open the Node.js project here, that since JSON is native in JavaScript, pretty much I can easily get data from a JSON object by just traversing properties. Sadly, we don't have that in Apex as easy as we can do it in JavaScript, but Apex provides a JSON parser that lets me serialize and deserialize a JSON structure and get this information. So let's do this as the last step. So what I want to do is create a new class. This class is going to be called weather data. It's going to be a wrapper class for my weather information. So public string city with the getter and the setter, and public decimal temperature with the getter and the setter. So I'm creating a class to pretty much represent that data that I want to have, like the city and the temperature, and I define these values from the constructor. So I have a constructor that it will pretty much have these values here. This is similar to a plain Java object in Java. And in the weather client, what I will do is this body, I am going to get that body as a JSON body, and then I will perform parsing. So instead of returning a string, I am going to be returning weather data. Let me create a new instance of weather data. New weather data. And then return that data. We need to get the city and the name here. So how are we going to do that? We are going to be using the JSON parser. So again, coming to the documentation, this is the JSON class. So we have a JSON class. The JSON class that has multiple methods. One of those methods is the serialize on type. So the serialize on type allow me to get a JSON string, and forgetting about the types, getting the pretty much an object structure like a map, so I can get the values. So this is pretty much what I will be doing. Let me copy and paste. Copy and paste is always valid. So I have this, I have a map, and I am deserializing the JSON body. So first, I'm going to get the name of the city by getting the string from the name property. So I'm passing the city here, and then I need the temperature. So to get the temperature is under another object, so I will need to again get another map. So I'm getting another map which has the main information, and this is as a map, so I'm doing the conversion. This is giving me the main information, and now I can get the temperature as a decimal from main. And now I can pass the temperature here and return the weather data. So as you can see here, I'm doing the JSON parsing, and this might be a little bit complex for certain operations, but Apex also gives me a way to deserialize over a class, and we will explore those ways later in the series. I want to try to get this code better, have a synchronous Apex, show you how to perform Apex triggers, how to have this code more production ready, but we are in the process of transforming this. Now let's execute the code. Let's use the script. We are going to get the weather data from the weather client, get weather data, get weather. Let me pass the variables, and then system debug, we are going to return the city, and system debug, we are going to return the temperature. If everything goes well, this is giving me that info. Okay, remember that this doesn't exist because I have not deployed, so I will need to deploy. For source push. While deploying, this is telling me if I have any syntax error, compilation error. It seems I don't have one. Nice. Awesome. Let me execute again. The execution was successful. And let me take a look here. I have the JSON, the temperature, and what is the city? Oh, the city here, Al Buraika. Awesome. We were able to pretty much implement half of our Node.js project, which is the weather client class that is performing the external HTTP callout by storing the API secret safely in Salesforce using custom settings, by parsing the JSON, and by creating a class that contains that data. What we are going to be doing next on the next session is creating the Apex REST service and see how can we connect the two worlds together and continue exploring the difference between Node.js and Apex. Let's hope you like this content. Before I go, I'm going to take a look at the chat because I see that we have some comments. Can you try creating the project directly on Visual Studio Code? I tried, but it was failing, but now I was able to put it to work. Tim says that he has problems with VS Code as well. The most recent issue required loading an old version of the CLI. I'm using the last version of the CLI, but needed to reload the Apex extension, and that fixed the issue. Yeah, Balakrishna, extension from my last question. I have an Angular application. I will create and update an account. Account needs to create in Salesforce. Can you show, please? We are planning to do Apex for front-end developers. And that's a very good use case. For that, and the next session, since I'm going to be showing you how to create an Apex REST service, you will be able to call Apex directly from Angular. So that would be a good example to show. I will take it into account. Gabriel, you have to authorize the endpoint inside Salesforce. Yes, I wanted to show that. I prefer to get the errors first and then solve them. Thank you very much. Joaquin, can you show this example but using Anonymous console inside the script Apex folder? Anonymous console. What is the Anonymous? Oh yeah, maybe Anonymous console. Maybe this was what I already showed. Yeah, I think I already did that. Awesome. Yes, I already used the SFDX with the IntelliSense. Eric Swanson, please allow turning off required test code coverage. Sure. I also need to cover testing because I have not covered testing yet. And that's a whole video. Alexander, thank you so much for the great session. Thank you very much for joining me. The script file 1. Yes, I have the script file 1. What do you mean? If you can help me, Joaquin, because I don't have the Anonymous console here. I have the currently selected text or with editor context. Let me see. Anonymous SFDX execute Anonymous Apex with editor contents. Execute Anonymous Apex, and that's what happened. It executed. I hope this is what you were mentioning. Okay. This is it. This is what we had today. Thank you very much for joining me. It makes me very happy. And see you. Oh, I wasn't even showing what I was presenting. Joaquin, sorry. I opened the script and what I did is execute Anonymous Apex with editor contents. And this opened this terminal and executed the code and gave me the response. I hope that was the thing you were asking for. So we are, say, 6 minutes after this session. Thank you very much again for joining me. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.